Welcome in, Hawks fans. Your boy Bryce Lewis back at it again for another Believe in Hawks episode. As you can see, I got another guest with me today. National NBA insider and reporter for Clutch Points, Brett Siegel, is here to give us all the information he has on our Atlanta Hawks. I appreciate you coming into the show, sir. How are you?
Yeah, no problem. Thanks for having me, Bryce.
Yeah, I'm glad you were able to come on, and I think we have a good conversation today about what's going on with the Atlanta Hawks. We're in the, they're in, the news cycles a lot right now, and let's just go ahead and dive right into it. So the Hawks, in the draft lottery, got the number one pick. Landry, a lot of people were surprised. Even though there was a chance, it was surprising, 3% chance. Now they have a big decision to make with that pick. Now, if they go ahead and keep the pick, I know you've been watching the NBA Combine. I know you've been keeping up with some of the guys. And I know you know who the top prospects are, even though there's not a clear number one. My first question to you is, with the Hawks situation, who do you think is the best pick if they keep the pick at number one for them to go? Is it an easy selection, or is it like, oh wait, there's a few people?
Well, it really depends on the direction that they want to take this franchise. And we've seen the various reports out there suggesting that maybe it's going to be Trae Young that's on the move, maybe Dejounte Murray's on the move, maybe Clint Capela and DeAndre Hunter, they'll look to move secondary guys. So it really depends on what direction Landry Fields and this team want to take. And it goes to the very top with ownership too. How much money is this organization willing to spend? And it truly does seem like that the Hawks want to put themselves in a position to be true contenders in the East. This isn't a project team. This isn't a system like the Detroit Pistons or the Washington Wizards where it's going to take a few years and they're going to completely rebuild. They have the foundation right now to be a very solid team in the East. You got guys like Trae Young and Dejounte Murray who are proven all-stars in this league. You have Bogdanovich, who's one of the best three-point weapons and honestly one of the better six men in the league when he's in that position. DeAndre Hunter, a two-way forward. Jalen Johnson, who they're extremely high on, and a player that they foresee being a potential star in their system. So I think when you look at the Hawks, it's a very interesting scenario. And I think that's very comparable to when the Pelicans won the number one pick a few years ago and they were able to draft Zion Williamson. They were a team that didn't finish last in the league. They were a borderline playoff team, ended up with the number one pick, and it kind of changed the trajectory of that franchise in terms of being a contender now, being a playoff threat now versus down the road. I think that we're going to see a similar approach here with the Hawks where they're going to navigate using this number one pick to kind of create leverage in the Eastern Conference and create a situation where who is going to be your star moving forward? Is it going to be Young? Is it going to be Murray? And then when you make that decision, obviously you have the number one pick coming in. Will that be Alex Sarr? Will it be Zachary Risacher? Both are out of France. Both are terrific prospects in my mind for the Hawks, given their length and versatility. So I think that one of those guys, you slide them in right next to Jalen Johnson in the front court. You potentially move Clint Capela to free up cap space. And then all of a sudden, you got the capability to go out and get another max player, another all-star. So I think that the direction of this franchise and the direction that they're trending in is definitely upwards right now. I could definitely see the Hawks going out and making a big splash during the offseason. But again, it's all up to how much they want to pay. And that seems to be a major question mark right now, not just with the Hawks, but with every team around the league because of this whole second apron rules and all the financial implications that come with the new CBA agreement. And we're going to see a lot of movement this offseason because of that. We're going to see a lot of teams looking to cut costs because of this new CBA.
Yeah, and it's it's funny you mentioned spending. Obviously, Tony Ressler, owner, people have questioned if he's been willing to spend. Some of the trades the Hawks have made the last couple of years have kind of seemed like cost-cutting moves. So it's made people wonder, are we trying to win if we're just letting players go for nothing? And so I think it'll be interesting to see what happens. And like you said, that second apron has been a deterrent for certain teams. And we're seeing what the Suns are going through right now. So out of the two prospects, Sarr, and I'm probably going to butcher his name, Ricochet.
Risacher.
Yeah. When you look at the two, is there a guy that you like more than the other? Is there what about each player do you really, really like and think could potentially be a good fit with the team?
It's a good question. I think that when you look at the Hawks with Sarr, I think that with his athleticism and length, it's very comparable to Jalen Johnson in terms of the way that he's able to run in transition. But the difference with Sarr is that he brings those shot blocking capabilities. He's a guy that can really be a two-way impact player immediately. He's not going to be like Victor Wembanyama with the Spurs, not going to be a guy that comes in and takes over the league like that. But he's going to be a really solid rotational player early on that has the potential to grow into an all-star. The same thing with Risacher. I think that for him, he's got a little bit more two-way capability out on the wing given his length. I'm not sure about his official measurement of wingspan, but right now I have him at like 6'11", 7 feet. And he's a wing that's being compared to Michael Porter Jr. because of his three-point shooting abilities. But I think that he's going to be a much better defender at the next level. I think that that's really where he's going to be able to make the difference early on of disrupting passing lanes and then ultimately being able to push the ball out in transition, be a spot-up three-point shooter. So I think that's really kind of whichever direction they want to go with the guys on their roster. If they want to trade DeAndre Hunter, I think Risacher would be an excellent replacement there. If they want to replace Clint Capela, you obviously have a Kongwu, but I think that Alex Sarr, given his capability to play the power forward or the center position, I think that you could run him out on the court and have him be your center at times. So I think that for the Hawks, it's just all about finding which guy is going to project to obviously be the best player down the road, but who's going to set you up to put yourself in a position where you're not going to be able to rebuild. You're going to be in a position where you are going to be going to the playoffs this upcoming year. You're going to be making moves to be a playoff team and grow into a contending threat, because it wasn't too long ago that the Atlanta Hawks were near the very top of the Eastern Conference, and Trae Young was right there, and they had a really good team. And all of a sudden, they just kind of fell off the last few years. They have a proven coach with Quinn Snyder. He knows what it takes to win. We saw it with the Utah Jazz for years. I think that he just needs the right guys in his system, and I think that the Atlanta Hawks are most likely going to be keeping this pick. Right now, I have them projected to take Alex Sarr. I think that that's the best fit. But I would not be shocked if they took Risacher either. This is going to be a process where they evaluate all their options at the top of the draft, and they're going to be willing to listen to offers that come their way for this pick. I wouldn't anticipate them trading it, but you just never know what kind of offer is going to come your way in a draft where there's really no clear-cut number one, and it's kind of underwhelming in terms of proven talent right away. I think if there's any draft in which you would trade the number one pick, it would be this one.
Yeah, and I think that's going to be the big thing that, people are going to wonder, are they? But at the same time, they're evaluating other options. They're going on trips. They're going to be scouting every player that potentially could be in play there. So they want to make the best decision for the team, like you mentioned. Now, with that pick, this transitions me into my next topic. Like you mentioned, Trae, Dejounte. Those are the two big names that are going to be out there. People are wondering, are they really going to trade Trae Young? Dejounte was shopped around the trade deadline. As of right now, yesterday I saw the article that you dropped about potentially with Cleveland being eliminated and Donovan potentially leaving. We'll see that the Hawks could maybe be a bit of a dark horse, a bit of a team that could keep an eye on Donovan. Obviously, there's the Quinn connection. He has a good relationship with Trae, like you mentioned. Is that something that when you mention that, like if he becomes available, like they're gonna be in it, or is it kind of like one of those situations where it's like they'll just see how things play out, and then depending on what they've done up to that point, that could make their decision for them?
From my understanding, it's more of the back half there. They're going to be kind of continuing to lurk in the shadows and kind of see what's going on. What's going to be his price? What could you get for Dejounte Murray? Would he be included in this trade package? What would you have to potentially give up for a player like Donovan Mitchell? Because you look at Donovan Mitchell, can he be the number one option for your team? Yes, but I think that he's much better being that number two cog in a championship puzzle. I mean, you just, for example, it's not going to happen necessarily, but the Los Angeles Lakers, they're number one right now, 1A, 1B, Anthony Davis, LeBron James. If you throw Donovan Mitchell into the equation, all of a sudden we're looking at the Lakers being arguably the best team in the league. And for the Hawks perspective, if you add Donovan Mitchell to that team, no, they're not going to be the best team in the league. But a 1-2 punch of Trae Young, Donovan Mitchell in the backcourt, two guys that have a lot of chemistry together. I know them both. I've met them both personally, and they have great chemistry. I've seen them on the court playing together and pick up games and practices. So I think they would be a very interesting scenario to play out there. And obviously the Quinn Snyder connection holds heavy. Donovan Mitchell wanted Quinn Snyder to possibly join the Cleveland Cavaliers when they were going through it last year with JB Bickerstaff, and there were questions about whether or not they would potentially move on from Bickerstaff. And he's always been a heavy advocate of Quinn Snyder. So I think that's definitely a situation to monitor. Would I peg Donovan Mitchell to be their number one trade target this offseason? No, I wouldn't, just because I feel like more teams are going to be willing to go up more than the Hawks would be willing to part with to get Donovan Mitchell. But they've certainly been a team that has monitored his status over the last year. And obviously he's going to be one of the heavier names mentioned in trade conversations this offseason. The second part of this question is obviously, is Donovan Mitchell going to be available? And quite honestly, from my understanding of the situation and those that I've talked with that are close with Mitchell, I don't expect him wanting out of Cleveland. I do expect him to get a lucrative offer from them to sign long term. And then the question will become, well, he did so with the Utah Jazz and was moved after a year or two there. Will he do the same with Cleveland if they don't devote themselves to winning right away? So I think that's more of the situation that we're seeing play out with Donovan Mitchell and the Cavs. I think that it's much more likely that they look to move on from Jared Allen and Darius Garland in the offseason.
Yeah, and I think that's obviously when it was mentioned, everybody was kind of like, "Whoa, really?" And now, I've seen a lot of the reports about, a lot of the reports with Cleveland, and they said like, "Yeah, Donovan's kind of leaning towards that," and obviously that means Darius Garland might ask out. Jared Allen seems like they're ready to move on, so it could be interesting to see how that could impact the Hawks and if they do actually get involved in that, like you said, depending on what happens. Now, going back to Dejounte and Trae, the big thing I think people want to know is, do the Hawks want to move off of Trae Young? Or is it if we get something that we can't refuse, we have to consider it? I feel like Dejounte is the guy, since they already had him out there, they're like still willing to like, hey, we can get a solid deal for him, we'll go ahead and move it. But I think Trae's the one that's like, are they really going to do it? What have you heard so far on that front?
The Hawks like both of them. They like Dejounte Murray. They like Trae Young. And obviously, there's been a lot of talk from fans about they can't play together. There's different metrics that show that it hasn't necessarily been the best pairing, but the Hawks tend to like it. And that's been their mindset all season long. Obviously, they made Dejounte Murray available at the trade deadline. They're willing to hear offers coming in, but it never really advanced that far. I mean, there was the offer from the Los Angeles Lakers, but there was never a counter from the Hawks on that. They never said, well, if you give us this player, it's going to be a done deal. They did say that they wanted Austin Reeves from the Lakers and they'd be willing to talk there, but the Lakers weren't willing to give up Reeves. So those talks kind of just dissipated, didn't really turn into anything. And then the other teams that were in on Dejounte Murray, it was never really anything that progressed to the point where the Hawks were seriously considering it. It was more of a feeler to see what they could get for Dejounte Murray at the trade deadline, because his value is going to be higher in the offseason when teams either A, have cap space to deal with, or B, are looking to get off of contracts. It's much harder to make those kind of trades during the season when teams are limited in terms of the cap availability and having to match player salaries and whatnot. It's much easier to get those type of deals done during the offseason. So by putting out feelers now, the Hawks can now have a blueprint entering the offseason of, okay, these are the teams that were interested. This is what they were offering. This is what Dejounte's value is now. Come at us with your best offer. And they can really go on from there. In terms of Trae Young, I really don't think that there's any leverage there of wanting to trade Trae Young. There's not many teams out there that A, he would be a great fit on, and B, would want to kind of take on that contract and take on the question mark of, well, would Trae Young, other than in pick and roll sets, really be of value to us? So I think that for the Hawks, he's in a system where they believe in him. They want him to be their leader. And Quinn Snyder, he's always been successful with a lead guard. Trae Young is his lead guard, and they've really bought into the whole pick and roll scenarios with him. And when he's been healthy, Trae Young's been really good. He played at an all-star level this season. He was amongst the league leaders in assists when he was on the court. So I think if you put the right personnel around him and guys that he truly wants to play with, I think that he can be the number one, number two option for the Hawks. So to answer your question of which one they're going to trade, or are they going to look to trade either of them, I think that any team in their position needs to do their due diligence and see what's out there for both players, see what kind of value you can get. But I don't think that there's any sense of urgency, if that's the right term, to say that they want to trade either one right now.
Yeah, and I think, I've always been on the side as I've always said if they got an offer they couldn't refuse, that's different. I just did not see them like aggressively trying to put it out there. I know a lot of people feel like a lot of it's just media driven, like they're trying to create the buzz and things of that nature. And I feel like that, Trae mentioning, hey, I want to win, but I want to be in Atlanta. I think that also has made some people be like, is he hinting that he may just ask out? But I'm also like, he doesn't give me that personality of a guy who's like, get me out of here. He kind of gives
And
me
I'll
the
put it this way
personality.
too. I'll put it this way with Trae Young in terms of getting a package that they can't refuse. If a team comes at them with a Rudy Gobert size package that the Utah Jazz got from the Timberwolves for Rudy Gobert, if a team offers that for Trae Young, I believe that Landry Fields and the Hawks would take that. But at this time, I don't see them actively going out and shopping Trae Young. I think it's just more of a sit back. We have the number one pick. We have flexibility with contracts that we can move. Let's kind of see who becomes available this offseason. We'll take it from there in terms of our plan of attack.
Yeah. So, well, like I said, it will be interesting to see as they progress into it, but it's interesting insight you just gave there on that situation. So I'll ask this question. If the plan is to draft Sarr, hypothetically, Do you think that increases the chances of the backcourt returning just because now you have that elite shot blocking big, a guy who some people maybe look at it could be a defensive culture setter? I've said the playoff teams you think about, a lot of them have like 7-foot bigs who could defend a lot of the floor, athletic, and that would be what the Hawks would be getting in him. And with their weakness at the point of attack, with obviously because they're not, the typical, they're 2 point guards trying to defend. Do you think that may be like, all right, let's draft Sarr and let's see what we got with Sarr in this backcourt?
Yeah, I think that's certainly a possibility that if you draft Sarr, it increases the likelihood of both guards returning. But I think that right now, if I had to rank it, I would probably say I'm leaning more towards 60-40 that they do return their backcourt of Trae Young and Dejounte Murray. I think that there is a chance that both of them start the year on the Hawks, and maybe it's something that they revisit again at the trade deadline if things aren't looking successful. But you bring in Sarr, that shores up your front court of Jalen Johnson, Sarr, Okongwu. You have no problems there in terms of defensive versatility and being able to go out and run in transition, as all three of those guys can run the court really well, especially Okongwu. I think that he's much better than many tend to realize, and I think that we're going to see that this season with him and see what the Hawks really believe in terms of Onyeka Okongwu's talents. So I think that that's certainly a possibility. I would look more towards the avenue of DeAndre Hunter and Clint Capela being on the move this offseason and seeing if the Hawks can make an upgrade there. Maybe they look to move one of the players to jump back up into the draft and get another first-round pick to add some defensive versatility on the wing. I mean, there's plenty of wing players in this draft that can make a difference. And just looking at my big board, there's a guy like Tristan Da Silva, a guy that can kind of do a little bit of everything out on the wing, can cost you less than DeAndre Hunter would, and a guy that you could work on moving forward. Bobby Klintman, excuse me, is another guy that I think is an excellent wing, much more underrated than many people tend to realize. And he's a guy that went from Sweden to Wake Forest to the NBL. And his defensive versatility and able to run on the wing, I think that Jalen Johnson is a pretty good comparison there for him as well. So I think that there's options for the Hawks ahead of the draft in terms of guys that they could move to get another draft pick. I think that there's even options in free agency that if they wanted to move some guys, they could either do a sign and trade, which would hard cap them, but they could potentially get a guy that they wanted, or go out and see if there's anything available. See if you can get guys for less amount than they were on contract. See if there's any value in some of these veteran guys out there. So I do think that if I had to lean a certain way, I would lean in the aspect of both guards potentially starting the season with the Hawks.
Okay. And I know that's going to be, interesting for some Hawks fans, especially how the season ended. I think a lot of people thought, oh, it's the end. Sometimes you have those season enders and man, it feels like something's happening. And then, off season happens, things go by and things don't change as much as maybe some people expect. So I'll ask you about a couple of players, and I want you to give me, I guess, if you think it's likely, not likely, they'll be moved. So I'll start with Clint Capela. How likely do you think Clint Capela is going to be moved by the Hawks this offseason?
I think very likely. And I think that you look at the contract, he's in the final year of his contract, $22 million. There's been some teams rumored to be in the market for centers. Obviously, the Dallas Mavericks were looking at Capela before this season. They now have Lively and Gafford, probably not an option there. But the New Orleans Pelicans are moving on from Jonas Valanciunas, most likely. Potentially, Clint Capela could slide in there in the final year of his contract with all the question marks surrounding Brandon Ingram and then wanting to extend Trey Murphy III there. So I think that that's a possible destination. The Oklahoma City Thunder could really use a center, and we're seeing that in this series against the Dallas Mavericks. So maybe there's an option there, and you get back some young assets or a draft pick or two from the Thunder. So I do think that Clint Capela being on the move, that I think that's the most likely scenario that we're looking at for the Hawks. And that's an instant $20 million right there that you can get off the books in the final year of his contract. You could potentially bring in another guy that maybe makes a little bit more. Maybe he makes $25 million and he has a few more years left on his contract, and he's simply a guy that you've wanted if you're the Hawks. But I think that it's much more likely that they move Capela's contract and get somewhere down in that $14 to $15 million range, get one or two players that you can bring in as role players around this core group that you're building.
Yeah, and I think the biggest thing for me too with Capela, and I think a lot of people, is just finally, depending on what happens, finally letting Okongwu start or just give him more playing time to see a guy you invested a top 10 pick in. Can he be like a core guy, instead of doing the bench game? So I think that's something that I think people will really be looking at and waiting to see what happens with the team. So then my next guy is DeAndre Hunter, a guy who made improvements this season. A lot of people don't want to admit it, but he made improvements this season. He had his best year from three, best year in terms of points in the season. Wings are very valuable in this league. How likely do you see DeAndre Hunter being moved?
I think that's kind of a scenario of what his market's looking like, because he is still owed $68 million over the next 3 seasons. It's a contract that's not that favorable in terms of what the new financial rules are in the NBA. So he's going to be eating up $22, $24 million over the next few years on the books. And teams are going to look at, is that a player that we really want to invest that kind of money in? Because yes, he has made improvements, but there's also been some concerns with DeAndre Hunter. There's been some concerns about A, his durability, and B, his true impact on the offensive end of the floor. We've seen what he can do defensively and running out in transition, but is he going to be a guy that can be your number 3 option or number 2 option on offense? And when you're paying a guy that kind of money, that's the kind of production you want to see. You want to see him somewhere up near 18, 19, 20 points per game. So I think that's really what we're looking at with DeAndre Hunter this offseason, of what kind of value is going to present itself. He is a wing. Wings are valuable in the NBA. I think if you can get a first-round pick out of it and you can decrease your salary intake, I think that's definitely a situation that Landry Fields and the Hawks would consider.
Okay. Yeah, and I think too, Hunter's just, with him being that top 10 pick too, and not panning out to maybe where people thought he would be. I think that's why there is this amongst Hawks fans, this eternal battle always going on. Like, is he worth it? Should we move him? He has a bad game, get him out of here. Has a good game, okay, maybe he's okay. It's one of those things. He's just one of those players on the team, like the Sixers and Tobias Harris, just one of those guys. But all right, so then my next guy, obviously we're going to go back to the backcourt here, Dejounte Murray. Again, someone who's been dangled out there before. Some people wonder, did he secretly request a trade and no one just said it? A lot of things have came out. Where are you feeling that vibe right now with Dejounte Murray?
As far as I know, Dejounte Murray's happy with the Hawks. Now, that may not mean anything. Maybe he's not actually happy, because you tend to never know with some of these guys. They put on fake personas all the time, say everything is great, and then they request a trade a week later. So you just never know. Obviously, Dejounte Murray had suitors at the trade deadline. The Knicks were a team that had initially inquired about his availability. That's something that they could potentially revisit if they were to make Julius Randle available in trade talks this offseason. Maybe they go and get a running mate in the backcourt for Jalen Brunson, but it is not a necessity for them to add another backcourt option in the offseason. So New York, I wouldn't think that they're going to be willing to pay a lot for a guy like Dejounte. The Bucks, another team that was kind of like the Hawks situation with Dejounte or with Donovan Mitchell, that they've been paying attention to him for a while. The Bucks are a team that have been paying attention to Dejounte Murray for a while, and they've been monitoring his situation. So I think that in terms of that situation of going to the Bucks, it would be a really good fit for Dejounte. I just don't know if A, the Bucks can make it financially work, and B, I don't think that the Bucks have the assets that the Hawks would want if they were to trade Dejounte Murray. So that's another iffy scenario. I think that the Orlando Magic would be a very attractive destination, given his two-way nature of play. I think that the Bulls, if they look to go out and get a guard, let's say they move Levine either to the Hawks or a different team, I think that they would be in the market for a player like Dejounte Murray to pair with Kobe White in their backcourt. So those are the few of the teams I'm looking at in the East. Obviously, the Detroit Pistons are going to be looking to make a splash this offseason as well. Over in the Western Conference, again, I go back to the New Orleans Pelicans. What is this team going to do this offseason? Are they going to move on from Brandon Ingram, who's entering the final year of his contract? Are they going to move on from Jonas Valanciunas, who's going to be a free agent? Are they going to extend Trey Murphy III? I think these are all questions that other teams and rival executives in the Western Conference are watching right now, because that not only plays a tale for what happens with Ingram and those guys, but it tells the tale for what's going to happen with Zion Williamson, because if he becomes available, you're going to have a plethora of teams looking to invest in Zion Williamson. Granted, he hasn't been the most durable player, but the talent's certainly there. And like Mitchell, he can be a cog in a championship equation on the right roster. So I think that the Pelicans definitely tell a tale of the offseason in the Western Conference. And then I think that a team like the Houston Rockets, I wouldn't count them out from making a big move either. And you look at what Ime Udoka was able to do in his first season there. He's always been fond of two-way guard play. They have Fred VanVleet. They have Amen Thompson, who was a really good point guard for them this season in his rookie year. I think if you bring in Dejounte Murray, that kind of shores things up, and it gives you another veteran presence to really make a playoff push there. So I think that there's definitely suitors out there for Dejounte Murray. It's just a matter of if the Hawks think, it's the right time to move on from him, and B, if they can secure 2 first-round picks and some value players out of him, because that's kind of what the asking price was around the trade deadline.
And that makes a lot of sense. You feel like you have a guy, even though he hasn't been an all-star in a few years, you feel like his all-star level, when Trae didn't play for a month, we saw what he did. So I think that's something that maybe that could have helped his value, like you said, with people having cap space now in the coming offseason. So my last thing for you before I let you go is obviously the last guy, Trae Young. We've heard Lakers, maybe. I've heard salt odds, Heat, maybe even Pistons. I know Pelicans have maybe thought there's a chance. Where you stand right now, Trae Young, suitors, likelihood, where are we at?
I think that there's 2 teams really that I would look at and say that it would make sense if they traded for Trae Young. The rest, it would just kind of be a question mark in my mind, and one of those scenarios of, well, let's see how it plays out. But the 2 teams that I would really say, I don't want to say have a chance of trading for Trae Young, because anybody has a chance if they make him available. But the 2 teams that I would kind of look at are the Spurs and the Lakers. There hasn't really been much traction with the Spurs. It seems like that the Spurs are committed to being a young team. Will they bring in a veteran or 2? Yeah, I think that they will. I don't think that player will be Trae Young, though. I don't think that they would be willing to give up the assets that the Hawks would want. And obviously, I think that there would be some question marks about his pairing with Victor Wembanyama, and they'd run really good pick and roll sets, but Wembanyama has that 2-way capability. He's an athletic big man, and Trae Young doesn't really fit the mold of what the Spurs have looked for over the last few years. They've looked for those 2-way guys out on the perimeter. They've looked for guys who they can make a difference on defense, and I think that we're going to see it in this draft coming up, where the Spurs have 4 and 8. If they keep both picks, I think that they're going to go after 2 guys that can not only improve their outlook immediately, but 2 guys that can really get after it defensively and help turn this team around next to Victor Wembanyama and turn them into a defensive juggernaut. So I think that's really what the Spurs are looking at there. I just don't see a scenario in which they find value in a trade for Trae Young. And then you have the Lakers. I think that right now they're monitoring Donovan Mitchell. If he becomes available, that's going to be their number 1 option in a potential trade. But D'Angelo Russell, all indications point to him opting out of his contract. And if that happens, that's a major asset in terms of financial implications that come off the board right there of what the Lakers could use for salary matching purposes. So now all of a sudden you have Gabe Vincent, Austin Reeves, and Rui Hachimura as your 3 contracts that you could move. And out of the 3, I think Austin Reeves is the only one that holds true value in trade talks right there. So I just don't see either of those 2 teams necessarily giving up what would be needed for a player like Trae Young of what the Hawks would want. And for what they could give up, I don't see Landry Fields and the Hawks really seeing that as value. So we're kind of at a stalemate here of what Team A can offer and what Team B really wants. And I think that for that reason, that's why we're going to see Trae Young stay with the Hawks.
Yeah, and then I think, especially when Trae Young switched agencies, people were wondering, what does this mean? Is this, because Clutch, I always like to say Clutch kind of runs some things. They have some connections,
Of course.
And so when he made that change, people wondered, does that mean he's likely to stay? Is he likely to go? Because, you never know what that means when agencies change. So it'll be interesting to see how things play out. Obviously, once we get past the postseason, then we'll get more answers, and then the draft comes, and then we'll see where we are in a couple of months. But Brett, I want to say I appreciate you, man, coming onto the show, giving me some of your insight and knowledge, and letting the Hawks fans know maybe what's going on with their team right now and everything. Let people know where they can find you, man, all your work.
Yeah, absolutely. You can find all my content leading up to the draft, all the offseason rumors and free agency signings on Clutch Points. We got a great team together there. I'm covering the league at large for us, and we have beat reporters for virtually every single team at Clutch Points. So it's a great brand, great company, and a great group of writers that we have there, great group of reporters. So you can definitely check out all of our work heading into the offseason there. And you can also follow me on Twitter at Brett Siegel NBA. Daily updates. That's the time that we're in, Bryce. It's the daily constant string leading up to the draft, 24/7 news cycle. And instead of getting it all in one night, we get 2 nights of the draft this year, which means double the work. So can't wait.
Yeah, definitely, man. Like I said, man, really appreciate you coming on and talking with me about the Hawks. And yeah, Hawks fans, we'll have to see what happens. Big questions that are still needing to be answered, but I think it's going to be a very exciting time. And I think there's a lot of excitement in the air for this team moving forward. I'm Bryce. That's Brent. See you next time.